Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into a world of silent shadows and the soft aroma of aging milk. You're not in your bed anymore, you're trudging up a misty hill in 12th century Burgundy, the pre-dawn sky just beginning to shift from indigo to slate. Your breath curls in the cold air as the bell tower tolls faintly above. A stone monastery looms damp with dew, its windows glowing like sleepy eyes barely open. You're about to step through the heavy wooden doors and join a group of men who rarely speak, barely eat, and oddly enough spend a surprising amount of their sacred lives making cheese. You probably won't survive this, let's be honest. Between the 4:00 a.m. wake-ups, the endless prayers, and the strict vow of silence, modern you is toast. But we're not here to survive, we're here to wander, listen, and gently drift off as the monks go about their daily devotion. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far this sleepy little community reaches. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step inside just as the first service begins, Laud's morning prayer. It's still dark in the chapel, candles flicker. The monks hum in low Gregorian tones that seem to vibrate right down your spine. But you're not staying here. Someone taps your arm gently, silently, and beckons you down a side hall. You follow past stone walls that smell faintly of wood smoke and sheep wool, past a cellar door where something, frankly funky, is brewing. You head into the outer cloister toward the barn. The barn itself is simple. Wooden beams, packed earth floor, the sound of hooves shifting in straw. 6 cows blink at you unimpressed as a young monk begins to milk them by hand. You crouch beside him, noticing how the warm milk splashes into the pail with a steady rhythm that somehow matches the chants from the chapel. This is how their day begins, not with sermon or scripture, but with udder and stool bucket and patience. Most people don't realize how critical this moment is. No milk, no cheese, no sustenance. These monks aren't just praying on empty stomachs, they're feeding an entire community through sacred dairy logistics. Because while they may have renounced the world's pleasures, they haven't given up the culinary loopholes. The cows here are lean but loved. They're brushed daily, fed on herbs from the monastery garden, and listened to with the kind of serene attention most of us reserve for Spotify playlists. The calmer the cow, the sweeter the milk, one monk once wrote in a marginal note beside a cheese recipe, though historians still argue whether this was meant literally or spiritually. Probably both. Monks didn't separate soul and stomach quite the way we do now. Outside, the sky grows lighter. You hear the creak of a wheelbarrow, another monk arriving with clean pails, this time for cream. You're invited wordlessly to help carry them back to the main kitchen. It's slow going. The pails are heavy. The path is uneven. But there's something calming in the way the day unfolds, not rushed, not stressed, just ongoing. A life arranged entirely around time, silence, and simple acts, repeated until they become something sacred. You pass under a low arch and the scent hits you before the door even opens. Warm milk, sharp whey, a little hint of hay, and a background note of something earthy and ancient cheese mid-creation. The kitchen is alive with steam and rhythm. One monk stirs a great copper vat with a wooden paddle the size of a canoe oar. Another gently ladles curds into woven baskets, letting them drip into shallow bowls. You don't speak. You just stand there watching. A tiny joke from an older monk, just a raised eyebrow, and a suspiciously cheese-shaped lump in his robe. You both smirk. Rule breaking never quite goes out of fashion. This, you begin to realize, isn't just a kitchen, it's a quiet engine room for the entire monastery. What the monks eat, what they trade, what they give to the poor, it all starts here. And cheese. Cheese is the cornerstone. It keeps longer than milk, it travels better than bread, and it can be eaten even when meat is forbidden, which, spoiler alert, is very often in a monastery. Not to mention it's delicious, though you'd better not say that out loud. The sun's properly up now, casting long bars of golden light through the arched windows. A bell rings in the distance, not calling you to prayer this time, but to the next task, washing and salting. You're handed a wooden paddle and you follow the others into the courtyard. There, a row of soft cheeses sits on slanted boards like little pale moons. Gently you begin brushing them with brine, learning the rhythm, swipe, turn, tap, replace. It's hypnotic. There's a moment where a bird lands nearby, a blackbird. He stares at you, tilts his head. You swear he smells the cheese. Someone behind you sneezes. You all pause. You realize how rarely you've heard any sound today, besides the natural ones, wood, wind, water, milk. And now a sneeze, a break in the flow. You all share a smile silently, then return to the brine. It's a strange feeling standing in a 900-year-old courtyard, rubbing salt on wheels of soft curd while trying not to sneeze. But it's deeply peaceful too. The world has narrowed, just you, the cheese, the breeze, and the rhythm of hands, doing what hands have done here for centuries. Somewhere in the distance a bell rings again, this time calling you back to the chapel. But before you go, you help stack the salted cheeses in a cart headed for the cellar. They wobble slightly but stay upright. Like monks in a way, firm, pale, silent, and just a little funky. And with that, you rejoin the rest of the cloister. Another hour gone. Another quiet ritual completed. You've barely said a word all day, but your mind still and soft like fresh curd waiting to age. You step quietly back into the cloister walk, feet landing soft on worn flagstones, smoothed by centuries of identical footsteps. The chapel bells have finished tolling, and the monks have already filed in for prime, the second prayer of the day. But not you. You follow a different path this time around, the back of the cloister garden, where vines creep up stone walls and herbs nod in the breeze. The smell of lavender and chive wafts by. It's almost enough to make you forget you're walking into a barn again. Except this isn't the cow barn, this is the goat shed. You weren't expecting goats. Nobody expects goats. But here they are, dozens of them bearded and unimpressed, some nibbling hay, others standing on barrels, like they're auditioning for a medieval circus. One trots over and butts your shin gently. You almost laugh almost, but you're deep into monk mode now, and even your smiles feel hushed. A monk appears from the shadows holding 2 wooden buckets and wearing a robe smeared with something suspiciously white and crumbly. He doesn't speak, of course, but you're already moving to help. The milking begins again, this time faster, fussier. Goats do not share the cow's sleepy compliance. They wiggle, they snort, and one manages to kick a bucket clean across the straw. You and the monk exchange the kind of slow-motion glance that means, well, that's happened before. It's here that you start to notice something odd. The monks are really good at this. The milking, the measuring, the precise timing, it's all second nature. And there's a reason for that. These aren't just chores. This is a vocation within a vocation. The monastic rule, especially the rule of Saint Benedict, demands a balance of prayer and labor, ora et labora. And while many outsiders imagine monks just reading dusty manuscripts and chanting psalms, the truth is a lot of them spent more time wrangling goats and sterilizing rennet spoons than copying scripture. You pass a small hand-carved shelf near the doorway, and there it is, a collection of carved wooden molds. Circular squares, some with tiny insignias cut into the base. These aren't just practical, they're beautiful. Some bear crosses, others symbols that historians still can't quite agree on. One features what looks like a pelican bleeding into a chalice, which sounds horrifying, until you remember medieval Christians really loved their metaphors. Historians still argue whether these designs were just decorative or symbolic signatures, a way of saying, this cheese came from St. Benedict's Abbey, and not those weirdo amateurs down the valley. Either way, it meant something. A cheese wasn't just food, it was identity. Back inside the kitchen, the goat's milk is strained through linen cloths, pale and fragrant. You stand beside a younger monk as he stirs it gently with a curved horn spoon. He hums as he works, not a Gregorian chant this time, but something even simpler. A folk melody passed down monk to monk like a lullaby for Kurds. The scent shifts again, now sharper, more acidic. That's the rennet working. It's a substance extracted from the stomachs of calves, or in some cases certain thistles. Monks were divided on which was holier. Animal-based rennet was traditional, sure, but plant-based rennet could be justified during fasting, and monks loved a good loophole, especially when it meant more cheese. The Kurds begin to separate tiny white clouds floating in a pale yellow sea. It's strangely beautiful, mesmerizing even. You watch as the monk cuts them with a long knife, breaking the mixture into clean, glistening cubes. Then he scoops them gently into baskets, pressing them down with slow, rhythmic hands. There's something almost musical about it all, the soft squish, the drip, drip, drip of whey, the creak of the floorboards as you shift your weight. Outside, birds call faintly in the distance. Inside, it's all ritual and repetition. It's here as the Kurds settle into their new shapes that you learn about the fasting rules. Here's the deal: monks weren't allowed meat during certain seasons. In some orders, they couldn't even eat eggs. But dairy was a gray area. And medieval monks, being clever, devout, and constantly hungry, declared that since cheese wasn't meat, and since milk came from animals but wasn't killed, and since curdling it into something dense and delicious obviously required divine intervention, well, cheese was fair game. And once they had the green light, they went wild. Some abbeys made soft cheeses, others hard. Some developed bloomy rinds, while others specialized in salty brined wheels that could survive a wagon ride to a distant village. One monastery in the Alps produced a cheese so pungent that nearby shepherds requested it be buried in barrels during transport. You can imagine the monk responsible nodding serenely as villagers fainted from the aroma. That wasn't an exaggeration. Cheese making wasn't just for self-sufficiency. It became a monastic export. Abbeys traded wheels of cheese for ink, vellum, even wine. And because monks had the time, tools, and obsessive personalities needed for perfection, their cheeses were often better than anything the average farmer could manage. You glance down at the mold now pressed and wrapped in linen, a fresh wheel still damp already holding its shape. It's marked with a tiny stamp, 2 crossed keys, possibly referencing St. Peter, possibly referencing the cellar key kept by the cheese master. Historians still argue that one too. The monk lifts the wheel and places it onto a wooden board beside 3 others. Each one looks slightly different milk, different mold, different aging time. They'll sit here for a day or two, then head down into the cellar where things really get interesting. But not yet. First you help wash the spoons, rinse the cloths, and sweep the straw-strewn floor. It's all done slowly, reverently. No rush, no noise, no distractions. There's a kind of joy in it, a rhythm that makes even goat cheese seem like a prayer. You're sitting on a low bench now, somewhere between the kitchen and the cloister garden, holding a warm cloth damp with whey. Your hands smell faintly sour, and your knees ache a little from kneeling beside the vat for so long. A monk passes, nods gently, and leaves a crust of dark rye bread beside you. Silent hospitality, the monastic version of you did good, kid. As you chew slowly, the sounds around you become clearer. The distant scrape of wooden sandals on stone, the flutter of birds in the herb garden, a soft clink of tools being returned to hooks, and above it all the faint echoing hush of prayer still lingering in the very stones of this place. But you're not staying still for long. Another monk beckons you up with a nod, and together you head toward the scriptoria, a quiet chamber just beyond the cloister where ancient texts are copied by hand. Why? Because this next part of the day isn't about making cheese, it's about making sense of it. You see, monks were meticulous, obsessed even. They recorded everything. Recipes, weather patterns, milk yields by season, how many hours each cheese was pressed, even which cow it came from. In some abbeys, you could track the entire monastic year just by reading the cheese logs. And not just practical notes. Oh no. Some monks added personal reflections, spiritual metaphors, little diary entries, even doodles. There's one surviving manuscript where a monk illustrated his cheese mold with the face of Saint Jerome. Another drew a tiny frowning goat, possibly an inside joke about a stubborn milk donor. Here in the scriptoria, you ease into a stool and watch as an elderly monk dips his quill in ink. He's writing slowly, methodically onto vellum. You glance down and realize it's a cheese ledger. Today's batch listed by type, quantity, and aging location. There's something oddly beautiful about it. Sacred dairy transcribed in Latin, surrounded by gilded letters and faint halo illustrations. It's around this time that you realize cheese wasn't just nourishment, it was theology. See, medieval monks didn't separate the sacred and the mundane. They believed God was present in every detail, every curd, every breath, every chime of the bell. And cheese was a daily reminder of patience, transformation, and the quiet alchemy of time. Milk becomes curd, curd becomes cheese, and cheese over months or even years becomes something fragrant, complex, and deeply satisfying. Kind of like spiritual growth, really. At least that's what the monks believed. You rise again and move through the cool hall toward the chapter house where a few monks are gathered, not praying this time, but debating. Quietly, of course. You settle on the edge of a bench and listen in. They're arguing over fasting days, specifically whether certain soft cheeses should be counted as a full meal. One monk holds up a tiny wheel no larger than your palm and insists that it is too small and too bland to offend the spirit of abstinence. Another argues that its richness, thanks to added herbs, borders on indulgence. Historians still argue about this very debate, how strictly each order enforced the fasting rules, and whether loopholes like cheese isn't meat held theological water. In truth, it varied wildly. Some abbeys lived on bread, cheese, and ale for months. Others banned cheese altogether during Lent. One particularly strict abbot once scolded his brothers for letting the rind grow too thick, claiming it was a form of pride. Yes, a proud rind. You stifle a yawn and glance at the stained glass. Afternoon light has begun to tilt, golden casting little blue and red patches across the floor. The cheese from this morning is probably cooling in the cellar by now, stacked in neat wooden racks, slowly becoming. But before you can go there, there's one more stop. You're led into a smaller side room, half pantry, half chapel. On the altar, not a candle, not a crucifix, but a cheese. A real one, wrapped in muslin and tied with twine. It's a votive offering, not common, but not unheard of either. Some monks, especially in rural or isolated abbeys, offered cheese as a tithe to the divine, a gesture of thanks for healthy livestock, good weather, or simply the miracle of fermentation. You step closer, the room smells faintly sharp and sweet. You imagine some novice monk, perhaps weeks ago, placing it here after a successful batch, a prayer wrapped in cloth. And then, like all monastic things, it's time to move again. This time you're following a narrow staircase downward into the cool belly of the abbey, the cellar, the cheese cathedral. The air changes, immediately damp, musky, just the right kind of cold. Torches flicker on the walls, casting long shadows across stone pillars and rows upon rows of wooden shelves. Each shelf holds wheels of cheese in various stages of maturity. Some are pale and new, others dark and blooming with mold like something from a wizard's pantry. A few even bear carved initials or strange symbols pressed deep into the rind like ancient coins. A monk gestures to a row marked with tiny clay tags. These, he silently explains, are this week's production. Still soft, still fragile, still changing. You reach out and lightly touch the rind. It's cool, slightly damp. You imagine what it might become in a few months, firmer, richer, speckled with blue. Maybe even smuggled out in a trade cart to a nearby village where someone will eat it slowly, by firelight, never guessing it was made in silence by candlelight in a stone monastery on the edge of a forgotten map. It's not exciting, it's not heroic, but it's steady, it's patient, and it's strangely beautiful. You sit on a small stool in the corner, breathing in the sleepy scent of sanctified mold, and feel your eyes begin to close. You blink awake to the sound of dripping water, soft rhythmic somewhere in the cellar's distant shadows. The torch near you has burned lower, its flame flickering against the damp stone. A nearby monk is carefully brushing a rind with brine, his movements so slow and deliberate, it's like watching someone paint on water. You rise quietly, joints creaking a little, and he hands you a soft bristled brush. No words, just a nod like an invitation to join the rhythm. And so you do. Each wheel is turned, inspected, and brushed with care. There's a meditative quality to it. The repetitive motion, the scent of salt and aged milk, the hush of cool air around you, it all starts to blend into something dreamlike. One wheel at a time, like small moons being polished for some monastic solar system. As you work, you notice how no two cheeses are exactly alike. Some are dappled with pale fuzz, others smoothed like polished ivory. A few are darker, crustier, with edges that crack slightly when touched. These are the elders, so to speak, the cheeses that have seen things, been through seasons, temperature shifts, maybe even an earthquake or two. The monk beside you points out one particularly old specimen. Its label, a sliver of bone tied with twine, reads a date from over a year ago. Still not ready, he whispers. And you blink, surprised his voice cuts through the silence like a breeze through a veil. He smiles faintly and adds, some things can't be rushed. You get it. This is the theology of fermentation, a kind of sacred patience. You can't microwave a miracle. You can only wait. Eventually the task is done. The cheeses gleam under torchlight, glistening slightly like well-washed pilgrims resting after a long journey. You stack your brush on a low shelf and follow the monk back up the stairs, your hands tingling faintly from salt and stillness. Back in the open air, the cloister feels warmer, brighter. It's early evening now. The sun is dipping low, casting gold and copper streaks across the stone walls. The herbs in the garden are fragrant rosemary, sage, a little thyme. You sit on a bench while the monks gather nearby for vespers. The chants rise again, deep and resonant, floating through the courtyard like warm water. You close your eyes for a moment, just listening. The piece is interrupted not harshly, but gently by a monk carrying a ledger. He stops beside you, opens the book, and shows you a page. On it, detailed notes, penned in precise Latin script. measurements, temperatures, cow rotations. But also this is where it gets interesting notes on flavor. One cheese is described as mild and grassy like springtime on the tongue. Another is sharper than Brother Bernard's wit and twice as long-lasting. You smile. The monks didn't just make cheese. They had opinions, preferences, secret rivalries. The soft rind team and the hard rind team. The brine soakers and the dry agers. Historians still debate whether this was a sign of holy diversity or deeply repressed culinary competitiveness. There's even a marginal note scrawled in tiny script tell Brother Matthew to stir longer next batch. His last wheel cracked like his sense of humor. You walk through the scriptorium again, and this time you spot something new. A corner shelf filled with tiny cheese molds. Not the big ones used for the daily rounds, these are miniature, ornamental, decorative maybe. One is shaped like a fish, another bears a tiny bell. A third, your favorite, is clearly a duck. No one's entirely sure why monks made these. Some think they were used for novitiate practice. Others suggest they were gifted to pilgrims. One theory even claims they were made just for fun. Yes, fun. Even monks allowed themselves a little levity now and then. Outside, the sun is nearly gone. Torches are lit along the cloister arches. A monk hands you a small bowl of something warm and milky. It's not quite soup, not quite pudding. It's made from leftover whey thickened with herbs and honey. It's delicious. And once again, it proves the point nothing is wasted here. Not time, not milk, not even whey. Everything is transformed, repurposed, blessed by slowness. You ask quietly how often they make cheese like this. The monk shrugs, then answers, every day, for hundreds of years. You look around and it hits you this isn't some reenactment. This is a lifestyle, a commitment, an entire worldview built on ritual simplicity and the quiet mastery of small things done well. No multitasking, no TikTok, just cheese prayer and the occasional joke about Brother Matthew's cracked rind. You take another bite of the whey pudding and feel a warmth spread through your chest. The torches flicker, the shadows deepen, and somewhere nearby a cow lowing softly signals the close of another monastic day. The monastery has grown quiet again in that particular way only a place devoted to silence can. Not empty, not still, but resting. Like the cheese wheels in the cellar, the air seems to thicken with waiting. Waiting for darkness, for compline, for dreams. But you're still awake following a soft trail of torchlight toward the outer kitchen. Tonight you're going to learn how cheese becomes something more than just food, how it turns into an act of devotion. The outer kitchen is smaller, warmer. A fire crackles in a stone hearth, casting a sleepy glow across hanging copper pots and racks of herbs. A round table sits in the center, dusted with flour and surrounded by bowls, baskets, and a single glowing wedge of semi-soft cheese. A monk sits waiting, older eyes like creased parchment hands stained from decades of herbs and brine. He gestures for you to sit. Then he slices the cheese slowly, reverently, and sets a piece before you. You taste it. It's nothing like store cheese. It's grassy sharp with a bite that reminds you of a cold morning in a warm barn. It tastes like silence if silence could ferment. The monk nods, then opens a small book. Inside are handwritten reflections, his own thoughts on cheese and prayer. Curds must separate, one line reads, as the soul must separate from desire. Another page simply says, salt prevents rot. So does humility. You sit with that for a while. Because here's the thing, for these monks, making cheese wasn't just about survival. It was theology. Every step mirrored some aspect of the spiritual life. Milk pure and whole breaks down into curds and whey. It must be cut, stirred, pressed its form, broken and reformed before it becomes something lasting, just like the soul. Historians call this monastic metaphor, and they're still debating how widespread it was. Some claim only the more contemplative orders like the Carthusians or Cistercians developed these symbolic interpretations. Others argue it was more instinctual, something that simply grew out of repetition. You spend enough time turning milk into cheese, you're bound to start seeing yourself in the process. The monk beside you chuckles softly, an actual chuckle, as he pulls out a tiny wooden stamp. It's shaped like a fish, just like one you saw earlier. He presses it into a ball of soft cheese, then offers it to you. "Symbol," he whispers. You hold it in your hands and nod. Maybe it's the hour or the warmth or the stillness of the room, but suddenly everything makes sense. You clean up, slowly rinsing wooden bowls in warm water, hanging the cloths over a line by the hearth. The fire has died down to embers, and a faint scent of rosemary clings to your sleeves. The monk waves you off with a smile, and you step back into the corridor. The halls are darker now, lit only by the occasional oil lamp in a wall niche. You follow the familiar path toward the dormitory, but take a short detour, just one more stop before rest. The library. It's smaller than you imagined. A single room with shelves built into the stone walls, filled with parchment rolls and bound volumes. A few monks sit at desks, copying by candlelight. But here's what surprises you. One of them is writing about cheese. Not theology, not scripture. Cheese. A slim volume, half completed, bearing the title, "On the Nature of Curds." You move closer. He's writing in Latin, but you catch enough to recognize recipes, storage instructions, and fascinatingly, reflections on taste. He's noting which herbs pair best with goat milk in the spring, how one batch developed a rind that resembled the face of Saint Joseph, although it vanished by morning. There's an entire section titled "On the Moods of Cows." You lean in. The monk glances up, then down again, and says softly, "They give different milk depending on the day." You believe him, because after everything you've seen today, from the milking to the molding, the chanting to the brushing, you've come to understand cheese was a living thing here. Not just food, a presence, a character in the monastery's quiet drama. You leave the library quietly, the scent of old paper lingering in your robe. Back in the corridor, the final bell of the day begins to toll, low, sonorous, calling the monks to Compline. Night prayer. You follow. The chapel is dark, but for the flicker of candles. The monks stand in rows, robes rustling, faintly faces turned toward the altar. You take a spot near the back, and as the chanting begins, low, steady, ancient, you let your eyes drift closed. You think about the cheese in the cellar, the fresh wheels you helped brush, the older ones crusted in ash or wrapped in cloth. You wonder what they'll taste like in 3 months, 6 months, a year. You imagine someone somewhere in the future biting into a slice and tasting the echo of this very moment. And you feel peaceful, not because anything grand happened, but because nothing did. No drama, no noise, just small rituals, repeated with care, over and over, until they become sacred. You hear the final amen, and the monks begin to leave one by one. You remain seated for a moment longer, the candlelight dancing across the stone floor, your breathing slow and even. Then you rise and return to your room. No words, no rush, still thinking about the monk who writes about cow moods and the cheese that once looked like Saint Joseph. You wake to the soft sound of bells again, somewhere between a chime and a sigh drifting through the narrow window above your straw-filled mattress. The air in your little monk's cell is cool and still. Dawn light filters in just enough to catch the floating specks of dust in the edge of your robe hanging from a peg. You rise slowly, stretch quietly, and pad barefoot across the stone floor. Another day begins. And so does the cheese. This morning, you're not heading to the barn. The cows can wait. Instead, you're off to one of the most surprisingly important rooms in the entire monastery, the pantry. Not the food pantry you might be imagining, but the medieval equivalent of a logistics hub. Here, records are kept, shelves are inventoried, and storage decisions are made with the seriousness of a royal decree. A round-faced monk greets you at the doorway. His robe is dusted with flour, and he's already holding a wax tablet, scratching something into it with a stylus. He gestures you inside and shows you a wooden chart hanging beside the door, a grid of cheeses, types, dates, and destinations. You quickly realize this is less a pantry and more a cheese war room. One wheel is marked for the bishop's table, another is set aside for barter with a local vintner, several are tagged for a nearby leper house, and just a few are marked internal use only, which you suspect is monk speak for snacks we won't mention at confession. It's fascinating, not just the cheese, but the structure. Everything is labeled, tracked, accounted for. This monastery may appear sleepy and peaceful, but it runs with the precision of a well-oiled cheese press. You spend an hour helping stack wheels into crates, each one carefully lined with straw. The crates are marked with simple painted symbols, stars, circles, waves, codes to indicate destination and ripeness. Some of the symbols are so obscure, even the monks debate what they mean. Wavy lines could mean wet cellar or blessed by Brother Simon. One mutters half joking. Historians still argue about how standardized these markings were. Some abbeys kept incredibly precise records, while others relied more on oral tradition. And some cheeses, let's be honest, probably got lost in translation, misdelivered, mislabeled, or mysteriously disappeared into a novice's robe. After the crates are prepped, you accompany a small group of monks to the front gate where a mule cart waits. The mule looks about as enthusiastic as you do before coffee, but the cart is ready, lined with hay, shaded by a tarp, and padded to keep the cheeses from cracking. As the gate creaks open, you step out for a rare moment beyond the walls. The morning air is fresh, laced with dew and the distant scent of pine. The cart creaks off down the road, heading toward the village, carrying its precious, pungent cargo. You don't follow. Instead, you return to the herb garden where two monks are snipping marjoram and thyme. These aren't just for seasoning meals. They'll be used in cheese making too. You didn't realize how many herbs went into cheese, but it makes sense, especially in an era without refrigeration. Herbs preserve. They flavor, they heal, and sometimes they protect. One monk shows you a small cloth pouch, inside crushed nettle salt and a dark, crumbly herb that smells like licorice. He sprinkles the mix onto a fresh wheel, then wraps it tightly in linen. This, he explains in a whisper, is St. Swithin's style, a monastery specialty thought to ward off illness. Is it medicinal? Is it magical? The monks don't say, but they've been making it for over 200 years, and nobody dares change the recipe. Herbal cheeses were often unique to their abbey. Some used lavender, others wild garlic, or even crushed rose petals. One Italian monastery became famous for washing their wheels in red wine during Lent, a technique so successful that modern cheesemakers still copy it. As you brush time off your sleeves, a novice appears beckoning you toward the kitchen again. Something about bread. Ah yes, bread and cheese, the monastic dream team. In the outer kitchen, loaves are rising under damp cloths. The smell is divine, yeasty, warm, comforting. But more importantly, it marks a major phase in today's cheese schedule pairing. Cheese wasn't eaten alone, you see. It was matched carefully with bread. Hard cheeses with dark rye, soft cheeses with barley loaves, herb cheeses with oat cakes. The monks even kept pairing notes, little charts showing which bread best lifted the soul when consumed with this week's wheels. You sit at the corner of a flour-dusted table watching as a monk slices bread into thin rounds, spreading each with a different cheese. The samples are arranged like a tasting flight. You try them one by one in silence. Soft goat cheese with roasted hazelnut bread, sharp cow's milk wheel with a slice of sour barley, nettle wrapped round paired with honeyed rye. It's quiet, it's sacred, it's weirdly gourmet, and as you chew thoughtfully, you realize this might be the world's first food pairing seminar, hosted not by sommeliers, but monks who took vows of silence and just really, really loved cheese. Outside, the sky begins to cloud over. A soft breeze picks up. One of the older monks looks up from his bread and mutters, "Storm's coming." You ask whether it'll affect the cheese. He shrugs. The cheese knows. You're not entirely sure what that means, but something about it feels true. You rise full, but not heavy, and head back toward the cloister garden, your hands warm with bread, your mind full of herbs and humble miracles. Another day unfolding, wrapped in linen and flavored with thyme. The clouds above the cloister thicken into a heavy gray ceiling, pressing the light down into a silvery wash across the stone walls and damp herb beds. You're in the garden again, sitting on a mossy bench beneath a crooked fig tree. There's a hush in the air, not silence exactly, but the kind of charged quiet that comes just before a storm. Somewhere overhead, a raven croaks like an old door hinge. You're not the only one out here. Across the path, two monks are engaged in what can only be described as an intensely calm disagreement. No raised voices, of course, just stiff posture, subtle eyebrow movements, and the occasional emphatic gesture toward a round of cheese resting on a linen cloth. You wander closer and realize they're debating flavor. One insists the cheese is clearly overaged, while the other claims it has simply ripened into truth. That's the actual phrase, ripened into truth. You nearly snort. This is your introduction to the quiet, surprisingly passionate world of monastic cheese rivalry. See, not all monks agreed on what good cheese tasted like. Some preferred the sharp, almost bitter wheels that came from long aging in dry cellars. Others loved soft, fragrant cheeses alive with herbs and wrapped in mossy cloth. And while no one shouted across the cloister, these preferences did shape entire abbey identities. Cistercians, for instance, were known for their minimalist approach, clean, precise, pale cheeses that age with a sort of stoic dignity. Benedictines, by contrast, often leaned into earthier, bolder flavors, sometimes using sheep's milk or adding smoky notes. You'd think this wouldn't matter, but it did. It really did. Because in a world where monks gave up so much speech, possessions, family taste became one of the few remaining ways to express personality. And so cheese became a kind of silent autobiography. That creamy herb speckled round, that's Brother Lucian, soft on the outside, surprisingly complex. The hard-aged wedge with a rind like tree bark, definitely Father Hubert, stubborn, unyielding, but secretly treasured. Historians still uncover old monastic letters that reference cheese indirectly. Brother Alaric's work remains firm and steady. One note reads, "It's not about his prayers, it's about his cheese." Back in the garden, the two monks seem to reach a truce. One offers the other a fresh fig. Peace is restored. You suspect the same argument has occurred every few months for decades, probably with the same conclusion. You're invited to taste the disputed cheese. It's stronger than you expected, salty, crumbly, with a hint of something woody. Maybe bay leaf, maybe disappointment. It's hard to tell. But it's definitely memorable. As the first raindrops begin to fall, you and the monks retreat into the open cloister where the covered walkway keeps the stone path dry and the conversation going. Or rather, the nods and shared smirks and faint sighs. These are monks after all. Gossip sounds like polite exhaling. One novice walks by carrying a cloth-wrapped cheese wheel with obvious reverence. You watch as he disappears into a side room you haven't visited yet. Curious, you follow slowly, politely, and find yourself inside what can only be described as the monastic cheese vault. It's not a cellar, it's not even that large, but it's meticulously clean, lined with shelves and wooden boxes. Inside each box, a cheese wrapped and labeled, stored like a holy relic. You spot names you recognize: St. Swithin's style, Brother Alaric's batch, Epiphany wheel 1249. Some of these are decades old, a few may never be eaten at all. A monk explains quietly that these wheels are preserved for special occasions, feasts, visiting bishops, or occasionally miracles. One box bears the inscription "opened only during famine." Another reads simply, "For Mary." You don't ask which Mary. Somehow it feels better not knowing. One particularly ornate box catches your eye. Painted with blue and gold designs, sealed with wax and tied shut with the cord. The monk leans in and says, "That one was blessed by a pope." You stare. He nods. We're not sure which one. Historians still debate whether such papal cheese blessings were widespread or rare. Some abbey records suggest popes requested specific cheese deliveries. Others hint that monastic flattery sometimes involved sending a particularly fine wheel with a prayer and a note that read something like, "May this humble offering soften the Holy Father's burdens in his bread." You wonder what kind of cheese could earn that kind of journey. Probably something mild, diplomatic, easy to love. Maybe Brother Lucian's. Leaving the vault, you notice a monk polishing the latch on the door, not for security, but out of sheer habit. The cheese here is safe, revered, practically canonized. As you return to the main hall, the rain begins in earnest, steady, soft rhythmic. It taps on the windows and echoes through the corridors like a lullaby. "A perfect cheese-aging day," someone whispers, and you believe them. Rain stabilizes. Humidity cools the air, calms the livestock. It's a good omen. Even the cows seem to know. You peek into the barn on your way past and find them resting, chewing slowly, tails flicking in sleepy rhythm. The goats naturally are fighting over a bucket. Back inside the kitchen smells like warmth and milk and thyme. A fresh batch is being stirred. The curds bob gently in the vat like tiny boats on a golden sea. You're handed a ladle and a wink. No words. Just another invitation to keep the rhythm going. Another step in the silent sacred dance. As you stir, you feel your thoughts slow. The warmth of the fire behind you. The soft splash of curds. The rain tapping on the roof like 100 tiny feet. It's not dramatic, it's not exciting, but it's everything. Rain continues its gentle percussion as you descend the stairs again, this time deeper than before. The torches along the walls flicker more dimly here, casting long rippling shadows against the stone. The air is heavier, cooler, yes, but also rich. It smells of earth and old wood, layered with the unmistakable tang of age mold, brine, and time itself. You've reached the aging rooms. This isn't the same neat ordered cellar you visited earlier. No, this is something different, a more ancient hidden level of the monastery, a place not all guests or even all monks ever see. The walls are lower, the stones older, rougher. The shelves don't gleam with order, they bulge with history. Wheels upon wheels of cheese rest here. Some are wrapped in leaves, others in cloth. A few sit bare, their rinds thick with blooms of blue or gray mold, cracked like desert clay. The smell is powerful, not unpleasant, but assertive, like an old man who tells you what he thinks before you even ask, eh? You follow Brother Edmund, an elder monk, with a limp and a soft whistle to his breathing, as he moves between rows with the care of a librarian tending to ancient scrolls. He carries a staff not for walking, but for knocking gently on rinds. "Listening for truth," he says softly. It's the second time today a monk has said something so cryptic about cheese that you just nod and accept it. He taps one wheel hollow sound a little dull. 2 more weeks. Another firm muted knock. Needs washing. A third bright echoing slightly. He smiles. Perfect. The cheeses are like sleeping monks themselves, each one in a different phase of transformation, each one following its own sacred timeline. You ask how they keep track. Brother Edmund smiles and holds up a small wax tablet filled with tiny lines and dots. Our code, he explains, it tells us everything. Historians still debate the accuracy of these early cheese logs. Some believe the monks developed entire calendars around aging schedules, adjusting production according to moon phases or saints' days. Others argue it was more intuitive, guided by taste, touch, and of course, faith. You stop at one shelf where several wheels are dusted in ash. Protection, Edmund explains, keeps the bugs out and the doubts. You try not to smile at that last part. These ash-rubbed cheeses were sometimes used for trade as their longer shelf. Life made them easier to transport. Others, like those wrapped in bark or soaked in wine, were considered medicinal or even slightly magical. One wheel bears a faded inscription in Latin for strength of the bones and clarity of the mind. Monastic cheese, nutritious and poetic. As you walk deeper into the aging room, you notice a small alcove carved into the wall. Inside sits a single wheel glowing faintly in the low torchlight, surrounded by candles. You blink. Yes, it's literally enshrined. Edmund sees your expression. Pilgrimage cheese, he murmurs, from Santiago, left here by a brother who walked all the way back. You nod slowly, trying to imagine the journey. Hundreds of miles on foot, months of blisters, prayer, and questionable ends, and then home and cheese. This wheel has aged in silence for years. It will never be eaten. It is memory shaped and salted. Nearby, a smaller monk, possibly the quietest human you've ever met, pulls out a heavy wooden box and carefully opens it. Inside, smaller cheeses rest in straw. Each one bears a symbol, a star, a spiral, a tree. These are the experimentals, Edmund says, and there's an unmistakable twinkle in his eye. Apparently even monks couldn't resist the thrill of culinary innovation. Some wheels were aged longer, some with herbs no one could name, some wrapped in cabbage leaves soaked in beer or rubbed with mustard seed. You try one. It crumbles at your touch, releasing a scent like old parchment and burnt honey. The taste is strange but comforting, like eating the memory of a story you once forgot. As you sit on a low stool nibbling this mystery cheese, Edmund pulls down a much older volume, a ledger from 2 centuries ago. Inside, you spot a scribbled recipe with no measurements, only directions. Stir until it feels like dawn. Salt when your thoughts turn inward. Age until you no longer care who eats it. You're not sure if it's metaphor or instruction, maybe both. You glance around the room one last time. The walls seem to breathe. The cheeses exhale. Somewhere above you, the rain continues to patter like a lullaby for monks and molds alike. Brother Edmund hands you a wheel, your wheel, not for eating, not yet, but marked with today's date, wrapped in linen and stored on a shelf, bearing your initials in chalk. You've officially entered the monastery's secret archive of cheese. As you leave the aging room, your senses are full. The cool air still clinging to your skin, the taste of ash and time on your tongue, the ghostly echo of wooden knocks against ancient wheels. The door shuts gently behind you, another miracle in the making. You're back in the upper cloister now, the rain tapering to a hush. The stones glisten under your sandals, damp and moss-kissed, and the soft wind smells of wet grass and distant smoke. You take a slow lap beneath the arches, feeling the rhythm of the place settle into your bones. It's just past terce, the mid-morning prayer, and you've been summoned to meet with the cellarer, the monk responsible for managing supplies, food, ale, grain, soap, and cheese. Lots of cheese. In many monasteries, the cellarer was second only to the abbot in responsibility, which means you're about to meet the man who keeps his holy cheese machine running smoothly. Brother Theobald is younger than you expected, tall with sleeves rolled up and a pencil tucked behind one ear. He greets you with a nod and immediately gestures for you to follow. You trail him down a long corridor past storage rooms, a dusty side chapel, and what appears to be a cloister cat snoozing in a basket of oat sacks. Your destination, the cheese records room. It's more impressive than you imagined. Shelves upon shelves of wooden tablets, wax boards, parchment scrolls, and cloth-bound ledgers. You step inside and the smell hits you a mix of beeswax ink, old vellum, and the faintest hint of cheddar. Theobald pulls down a thick book titled Curds Rendered 12/12/30. You flip through the pages and find meticulous entries, number of wheels, produced size milk source herb additions, weather notes, and oddly drawings. Tiny ones, goats with speech bubbles, cheese wheels wearing crowns. One page features a monk and a cheese arm wrestling. The monk appears to be losing. You raise an eyebrow. Brother Theobald shrugs. They get bored. Turns out these records weren't just inventories. They were reflections. Monks jotted down dreams, prayers, odd thoughts, even cheese-related epiphanies. One entry reads, "The blue mold reminds me of the sky over Galilee, soft and full of secrets." You don't know whether to laugh or frame it. As you leaf further, you spot a different kind of entry, a list of levies, cheese taxes. Yes, the monastery paid feudal cheese tax, and it wasn't light. Every year, the monks owed a certain number of wheels to their local lord. Sometimes the tax was fixed. Other times it varied depending on the harvest milk yields and the mood of whoever collected it. Some lords were fair content with simple cow's milk cheese. Others, spoiled ambitious or simply gluttonous, demanded specific styles. Goat's milk aged on ash, soft rounds infused with sage wheels bearing the abbey seal. One entry from 1189 records an entire wagon of cheese diverted by a baron's hunting party. No apology, no refund. This led to creative accounting. Monks became masters of cheese diplomacy. You find a hidden drawer in the cellarer's desk. Inside are copies of old letters, some hilariously polite, arguing over delivery dates, complaining about missing shipments, or explaining that due to an unfortunate curdling incident, the cheese would be delayed another week. One reply from the abbot to a particularly demanding noble reads, "Your lordship's fondness for our sharpest cheese is matched only by the sharpness of your tongue. We trust both will mellow with age." Brother Theobald grins. That one got him reassigned. You begin to see cheese not just as food or faith, but as currency, a unit of trust, a tool for survival. When famine hit, monasteries shared cheese with local villagers quietly, generously. When merchants passed through, monks bartered wheels for ink tools, even rare spices. And during times of political unrest, cheese could be used to smooth tensions, bribe minor officials, or subtly curry favor with the church hierarchy. Of course, this wasn't without risk. Transporting cheese beyond monastery walls required care. Too soft and it would spoil. Too aged and it might crack or crumble. Some monks developed elaborate packing methods, wheels wrapped in straw, placed in clay jars, even sealed in beeswax. One especially daring abbey once coated their wheels in ash and disguised them as charcoal bricks. It worked until a cook tried to light one on fire. Historians still debate whether monastic cheese smuggling was widespread or merely occasional. But the evidence is clear. Cheese wasn't just produced. It was negotiated, disguised, delivered, and on occasion deeply resented. One monk's marginalia in a 13th century ledger simply reads, "They take our prayers and our cheese. Only one of them comes back." You and Brother Theobald laugh quietly at that. Eventually, he pulls a rope hanging beside the wall. A bell rings somewhere in the kitchen, time to begin mid-morning curdling. But before you go, he hands you a small wooden stamp. It's carved with your initials. You've earned your mark, he says. You hold it in your hand, smooth, weighty. You imagine pressing it into a soft round of cheese. Your own silent signature tucked between layers of flavor and time. As you leave the records room, you feel the deep hum of continuity, cheese after cheese, monk after monk, wordless but persistent, a lineage carved in curd and wax and ink. You step back into the corridor just as sunlight cuts through a break in the clouds, lighting up the cloister walk in streaks of gold. The cat stretches in its oat basket. Somewhere nearby, a novice drops a bucket and mutters an apology in Latin. And in the distance, you hear the squelch and slap of fresh curds hitting warm linen. Back to the vat you go. You return to the kitchen as a fresh batch of curds is forming in the great copper vat. The room is steamy and fragrant, filled with the quiet bustle of monks in motion. Measured scoops, slow, stirring low murmurs. It's a dance that's been performed for centuries, and now you're beginning to feel its rhythm in your own body. The morning milk has been brought and strained and warmed. A monk gently stirs the liquid, waiting for the rennet to do its sacred work. And then, like clockwork, the milk splits. The curds rise like soft clouds. The whey pools pale and clear beneath. You step up with your wooden ladle, pressing the curds into the muslin-lined baskets. There's a satisfying weight to it, like tucking in a child or patting a full pillow. You can't help but smile as a curd slurps over the side and lands on your boot. The monk beside you smirks. You're in. Once the curds are packed and pressed, you're directed to a side table. Today you'll be preparing cheese for the poor. That's what they call it here, the giving rounds. Smaller wheels often made from the leftover curds of multiple batches, sometimes softer, sometimes crumbly, occasionally weird, but always made with care. Because charity was central to monastic life, monks didn't just pray and copy texts they served. They tended gardens, healed wounds, taught the local children, and fed the hungry. And while bread and broth were common gifts, cheese held a special place. It lasted, it traveled, it provided protein, calcium, and comfort. You help shape the smaller rounds, carefully pressing the cloth, weighing each wheel with your hands to match the others. They're imperfect, a little lumpier, a little less uniform, but somehow more sincere. A bell rings, a side door opens, villagers trickle in, mothers, children, old men in patched cloaks. They wait patiently, hands folded. A monk steps forward, speaks a brief Latin blessing, and begins distributing the cheese. One boy gets a wheel the size of his face. He grins, his mother mouths a silent thank you. You stand to the side watching. The rain has stopped now, leaving the world outside glossy and fresh. It smells like wet stone and wild onion. One elderly man approaches slowly. His hands tremble as he receives his round. Then he does something unexpected. He breaks it in half and offers you a piece. You hesitate, but the monk beside you nods, so you accept. It's warm, slightly crumbly, with a sharpness that surprises you. A cheese made of leftovers, and yet somehow perfect. Like the monks themselves, assembled from fragments bound by purpose, quietly nourishing the world. The moment passes. The man shuffles off. The monks clean up the table. But the taste lingers. Later that afternoon, you find yourself invited to a quieter space, a small stone room just off the cloister walk. Inside, a single monk is preparing a different kind of cheese. This is ricotta, he explains in a whisper. Twice cooked. You sit and watch as he heats the whey left over from earlier batches. As it warms, faint white curds begin to rise, smaller, gentler than the morning's production. The room fills with a delicate scent lighter than usual, more subtle, like steamed milk and sweet hay. Ricotta was beloved by monks for its thriftiness, nothing wasted. Even after the real cheese was done, this humble byproduct could be coaxed into something new, a soft, spoonable, fleeting cheese, often eaten warm, almost never aged. The monk offers you a bowl still steaming. He drizzles it with honey and crumbles a few roasted chestnuts on top. You take a bite. It's unlike anything you've tasted so far, creamy light, slightly sweet. It melts without resistance and carries with it a feeling of something sacred, fleeting, and impossibly tender. You sit in silence, letting the warmth of the ricotta settle into your chest, feeling it echo through your limbs like soft bells ringing far away. The monk beside you doesn't speak. He just watches the pot stirring slowly, steam rising around his face like incense in a chapel. This is the cheese of quiet afternoons, not made for storage trade or taxation. It's not shaped into wills or branded with seals. It's made to be shared, eaten fresh and forgotten by tomorrow. But in this moment, it's everything. When you finish the bowl, the monk takes it gently as if lifting a sleeping bird and places it in a basin to be washed later. Then wordlessly he hands you a scrap of parchment, a prayer handwritten and brief. The second turning is sometimes the truest. You nod, slipping it into your sleeve like a secret. Later back in the cloister, you notice something odd. There's a group of monks sitting on the grass beneath the fig tree from earlier. Each one holds a small round of cheese, some nibble quietly. Others just hold theirs, cradling them like fragile treasures. A few are whispering jokes. You edge closer. What you're witnessing, it turns out, is the Cheese Tasting Council. Not official, mind you, but very real. Once a month after the busiest production weeks, a handful of monks gather for what can only be described as a low-stakes flavor tribunal. Today's topic: evaluating 3 new batches of herbal cheese, one with rosemary, one with wild fennel, and one dubiously with dried apple peel. You're invited to sit. A small round is passed your way, herbed, pale, lightly waxed. You take a bite. It tastes like sunlight on old wood, a hint of mint, a suggestion of pepper, maybe even apples. One monk mutters, stroking his beard with theatrical gravitas, unexpectedly autumnal. Another nods sagely, might pair well with regret. They all chuckle, soft, quiet laughs that feel like secrets unfolding. The tasting continues. Each monk offers a word or two, no scoring, no judgment, just reflection. Then, as the last round is passed, one monk begins humming a chant. Not a hymn exactly, something sillier. You recognize the melody from earlier this week when a goat sneezed during milking. You laugh, you can't help it. And no one shushes you. That's when it hits you. The monastery isn't just solemn, it's playful. In its own deeply reverent, gently peculiar way. Cheese has become the language of that playfulness, of that humanity. Because in a world of rigid schedules and sacred rituals, the monks needed something less defined, something imperfect, funky, and crumbly, deliciously unpredictable. And cheese filled that role perfectly. Before you leave the circle, one monk breaks off a corner of a wheel and hands it to you. "This one's not great," he says, grinning. But sometimes it's the not great ones that teach you the most. You chew thoughtfully. It's sour, weirdly floral, and just a little too soft. But you know exactly what he means. You spend the rest of the afternoon in the garden, belly full, robe damp at the hem from the wet grass. Bees hum lazily in the lavender. The sun has broken through for good now, bathing the abbey in gold. You don't go back to the kitchen, or the cellar, or the scriptorium. You just sit, feeling the weight of the day settle into your limbs like a slow, pleasant fog. Because today you've come to understand something deeper than any recipe or ledger. Cheese wasn't just survival, or ritual, or economy. It was joy, and sometimes, even in silence, even in a place built on structure and sacrifice, joy was allowed to slip through the cracks, round and golden, crumbling at the edges, slightly too strong and entirely unforgettable. Late afternoon stretches across the abbey like a soft blanket, and you're back near the guest house, resting your back against a sun-warmed wall. Your hands still smell faintly of whey and rosemary, your sleeves dusted with flour from earlier, and somewhere a bell rings half-heartedly, as if even it has grown sleepy. But rest is short-lived. A novice appears barefoot, breathless, and motions you to follow him through a side gate. He doesn't explain, but his eyes sparkle like he's letting you in on something secret. And he is. You're about to witness a tradition older than most of the abbey walls, the arrival of the pilgrims. Pilgrims, of course, have always wandered Europe, feet sore cloaks, torn hats pinned with scallop shells and local charms. And monks as keepers of both the soul and the cellar have always fed them. But you didn't expect this a half-dozen road-weary travelers standing in the courtyard, each holding a staff or a sack or a hopeful look. Some are barefoot. One carries a small icon strapped to his back. Another wears a patched cloak decorated with dozens of stitched-on monastery emblems like a medieval sticker collection. They smell like rain, sweat, dust, and faith, and they're hungry. You help carry out baskets, loaves of dark bread, hard pears, jars of pickled carrots, and of course cheese. But not the fancy stuff, not the wheels meant for bishops or aging rooms. This is travel cheese, pilgrim cheese. It's dense, salty, and intentionally tough, meant to be chewed slowly over miles. Some of it is smoked, some wrapped in cloth, some rolled in ash. It tastes like survival. You hand a wheel to the man with the icon. He bows deeply and presses his hand to his heart. You bow back, unsure of the protocol, but it seems to be enough. One woman speaks just enough Latin to murmur thanks. She says she's walked for weeks, slept in forests, seen wolves, had a vision. You glance at the cheese in her hands and wonder how much of her journey will depend on that single wheel. As the pilgrims settle beneath the arbor for their meal, one of the older monks approaches you with a small box. He opens it slowly, revealing a set of delicate metal stamps, not for marking cheese, for marking tokens. Turns out some monasteries, this one included, gave special tokens to pilgrims. Little lead or pewter coins stamped with the abbey's crest or a symbol of the saint it was built to honor. These tokens weren't currency. They were memories, proof of the path, stories pressed in metal. The monk lets you press one yourself, a small circular disc with the sheep on one side and a wheel of cheese on the other. You hand it to a young boy who's arrived with his father, his face sunburned, his toes peeking through worn leather sandals. He holds it like treasure, because it is. Over the next hour, you help serve or listen, and when it's requested, bless cheese. Yes, you heard that right. Some pilgrims ask for it, not loudly, not formally, just a quiet gesture. A wheel held out a hopeful look, and a monk places a hand over it, murmurs a short prayer, and presses the sign of the cross into the rind with a thumb. Historians still argue whether this practice had any official sanction. Some claim it was common, especially in France and Spain. Others say it was more of a folk custom, monks indulging the superstitions of the road. But whether or not it was allowed, it certainly happened. And in this moment, as the sun filters through grapevines and the pilgrims eat in slow, reverent silence, you understand why. A meal on the road isn't just food, it's hope, it's fuel, it's faith you can chew. Later, as the pilgrims pack up to leave, they each receive another small gift, a wax-wrapped bundle of hard cheese. Some tie it to their belts. One woman tucks hers into the folds of her robe, and one young man, barely more than a boy, tucks his under his hat. You're not sure that's wise, but no one stops him. As they leave, you watch them disappear down the road, figures made small by distance marked by dust and blessing. You glance down at the last piece of cheese left behind, a small wedge slightly crumbled. You wrap it gently and place it in the pantry. Maybe someone else will need it tomorrow. As the door creaks shut, you stand in the quiet and feel something you didn't expect. Not pride, not hunger, just connection. The monks made the cheese, you helped carry it, and now it's out there walking dusty roads hidden in pouches shared by campfires, maybe even buried with someone beneath a wayside stone. And suddenly cheese seems larger than it ever did before. A wheel with no edge, a meal with a soul, a story that doesn't end here. It's late now. The sun has begun its slow descent behind the hills, casting long shadows across the cloister walk. Most of the monks are gathered in the chapel for vespers, their voices rising in soft harmony beneath the vaulted ceiling. You, however, have been quietly ushered elsewhere, down a narrow stair, past a wooden gate, into the oldest part of the monastery where the air is thick with dust and the stones remember everything. You're entering the front lines of a war that's been waged silently, fiercely, and absolutely endlessly. The war against mice. Yes, even in a house of prayer, even amid sacred texts and solemn chants, there was a battle happening. A battle fought not with swords or excommunications, but with traps, tallow, and near-mythical patience. You've been brought into the cheese armory. This chamber is no bigger than a pantry, but its shelves are lined with strange contraptions, carved wooden boxes, spring-loaded levers, tiny noose-like loops made from horsehair, and what appears to be a clay pot baited with raisins. Brother Adelard, the monastery's unofficial rodent strategist, gives you a look that says, "This is not a joke," and hands you a tiny cage. Inside it, a wedge of hardened cheese. Bait, he explains in a whisper worthy of a spy thriller, that mice are drawn to the aging rooms, the storerooms, the corners of the kitchen where crumbs fall, and monks occasionally forget to sweep. And they come in swarms. They're clever, he says. They wait, they listen, they know when a door creaks. It's not just the cheese they go after, though. That's certainly the Holy Grail. They'll chew parchment, nibble candle wicks, even take bits of wool from the monks' robes to line their nests. But cheese. That's what keeps Brother Adelard awake at night. You help him set one of the traps, a stone tunnel with a tripwire made of soaked flax. "The mice will go for this one," he murmurs. "They think it's abandoned." You both sit still for a moment listening. Somewhere faintly you hear the telltale scratch of tiny paws. The monk closes his eyes and nods once as if confirming a hunch. This is a man who studies his enemy. You learn that monasteries across Europe had similar problems. The older the building, the more nooks and cracks for rodents to sneak through. Some monks tried herbs, mint, rosemary, even lavender to repel the invaders. Others used cats. One famous abbey in Germany reportedly had a cat who was not only allowed to sit on the altar, but was given his own name in the monastery roll book, Brother Mew. This abbey doesn't have a cat, it has Adelard. And while historians might debate the actual impact of rodent theft on monastic economies here and now, it's very real. One stolen wheel of cheese could mean a hungry pilgrim. One nibbled scroll could mean a prayer lost to time. You set another trap, a simple lever one. Adelard nods his approval. He's warming up to you. Then he shows you something unexpected. A small drawer beneath the shelf opened with a rusty iron key. Inside dozens of tiny carvings, mice made of wood, clay, even cheese. Some smiling, some angry, some oddly heroic. They're trophies, he says with a wink. He pulls one out, a tiny wooden mouse holding a crumb like a scepter. This one was clever. Got into the bread flour. Twice. We named him Lord Sift. You laugh. Out loud, it echoes in the chamber. Quiet Adelard hisses, but he's smiling too. You realize that this battle isn't just about cheese. It's about control, about protecting something sacred in a world that keeps trying to nibble it away. Later, as you climb the stairs out of the cheese bunker, you pass a small shrine tucked into a wall niche. It's barely noticeable, just a faded painting of a saint holding a round of cheese in a staff shaped like a broom. You ask who it is. Adelard leans in. Unofficial patron of the cheese vault, Saint Rodentius. We made him up. You nod. Makes sense. He winks again. He's very busy. You step back into the corridor just as the monks exit the chapel, filing past with quiet grace. The war below continues unseen, but the cheese is safe. For now. You walk slowly back to the garden, the last light of the day, brushing the fig leaves with gold. You sit on the same mossy bench where you tasted your first experimental wheel, and this time you feel different. You've seen the whole ecosystem now. The cows, the curds, the sellers, the ledgers, the pilgrims, the pests. It's not just cheese. It's a living tradition, a monastery within a monastery. And you, however briefly, are part of its history. As the sky fades into that beautiful deep blue that comes just before the stars, you wonder what wheel is being shaped. Now, what rind is forming silently in the dark? What mouse is waiting for night to fall? And you think of Saint Rodentius watching over it all, with his broom and his cheese. The stars are out now, faint and flickering above the abbey's sloped roofs. Most of the monks are settling in for the night, preparing for Compline, or quietly folding robes in their cells. But you're not done, not just yet. You've been invited to a rare conversation in the herbal chamber, a vaulted room tucked beneath the infirmary. It smells like dried lavender, beeswax, thyme, and something faintly creamy like warm milk left near a window. This is where the monks store their medicinal herbs, mix tinctures, and occasionally, very occasionally, speculate on why some monks live so astonishingly long. You're here to talk about cheese. Brother Pasquale, the infirmarian, welcomes you with a gesture and a sleepy half-smile. He's old in the way cheese wheels are old, deeply fragrant, full of wisdom, and not quite ready to be discarded. He walks you through a small collection of shelves where cheeses have been marked, fortifying gentle on the stomach, or in one case, don't ask, just chew. He offers you a seat beside a candle and sets down a wedge of cheese in a cup of warm goat milk, steeped with fennel. You sip. He begins. There is a long-standing rumor, supported by some, scoffed at by others, that monks, particularly cheese-making monks, lived longer than the average medieval peasant, and not just by a few years, by decades. Of course, several things helped: clean water, regular meals, daily routine, and stress levels somewhere below grape. But Pasquale believes there's something else too, something in the cheese. Not magic, not miracle, just layers of natural science hidden within tradition. Cheese provided nutrients monks couldn't always get elsewhere, calcium, protein, and probiotic cultures that even today's nutritionists would applaud, especially when made in small, precise batches with local herbs and unprocessed milk. Food that comes from prayer, Pasquale mutters, lasts longer, nourishes deeper. He hands you a notebook bound in worn leather. Inside are records not of medicine, not of prayers, but of cheese diets. Pages upon pages listing which monks ate which cheese, how often, and for how long, followed by brief notes on ailments, recoveries, and longevity. One monk, Brother Clement, ate nothing but herb-wrapped goat cheese pears and warm barley water for 17 years. He lived to be 93. Another brother, Odo, swore by blue cheese and honey, and according to legend hadn't sneezed since the Feast of Epiphany in 1192. You can't verify these claims, but the notes are sincere, the ink faded and smudged by time and thumbprints. Historians naturally remain skeptical. Some argue that these records were idealized. Others point out that many of the monks who lived longest also worked the least. Brother Clement, for instance, was assigned to window watching for most of his later years. Still, the idea lingers. Pasquale leans forward. When you eat something made with care by someone who believes in what they're doing, the body listens. You don't know if that's science mysticism or just a very poetic placebo, but as you take another sip of fennel milk and let the cheese melt on your tongue, you kinda don't care. The candle gutters low, casting shadows across the handwritten pages. Outside, an owl calls once clear and low, and the abbey answers with stillness. Pasquale rises slowly, his joints creaking like an old chapel door. He leads you to a small alcove in the corner of the room where a stack of older cheese rounds rests beneath cloth and straw. "These are our rest wheels," he says, "given to those preparing for death, not as medicine, as comfort. You're quiet now." Each wheel bears the initials of a monk. Some have dates, others are blank. A few have been half-eaten, then carefully wrapped again and returned to the stack. Some ask for them, Pasquale says, others receive them quietly. You run your hand over one of the rounds. It's cool and dense, pressed with a cross and wrapped in a linen strip, stitched with tiny green thread. The idea that someone's last bite might be of something slow, humble, handmade, something salted and stirred in silence that feels somehow like grace. And maybe that's the real secret, not the calcium, not the whey, but the ritual, the repetition, the invisible care. Pasquale hands you a small wheel from a different shelf. It's labeled Refectory Night Batch, mild. You hold it carefully like you're cradling an egg or a relic. It smells of herbs, wood smoke, and faintly clover. As you leave the infirmary, the halls are mostly dark. Only a few candles flicker in distant niches. You pass the library, the kitchen, the scriptorium, all resting now. But you know somewhere deep below the floor you can still hear it. The soft drip of whey, the creak of aging shelves, the gentle rustle of mice being politely, prayerfully outwitted. And at the heart of it all, wheels of cheese quietly becoming themselves one slow hour at a time. You return to your cell. The stars are blinking lazily outside your window. You set the small wheel of cheese beside your bed like a votive, like a companion, and you whisper, without meaning to, "May I age half as well, morning again." Not the sharp, chilly sort of morning that bites at your fingers and wakes you with its breath, but a softer one. A morning that slips in like a cat curling in the corners of your cell, brushing its golden tail across your face through the narrow window slit. You rise slowly. Everything aches, but in the right way. The way you ache after doing something that felt meaningful, or after scrubbing the better part of a cheese vat. You just splash cold water on your face and head toward the outer cloister. But before you can reach the courtyard, a smell catches your attention. It's everywhere, floating down the corridors, winding its way up staircases and into prayer rooms. A scent you've come to know love and at times mildly fear. The smell of cheese in bloom. Today you're invited to join Brother Furman on what he calls his rounds of scent. He is, for lack of a better word, the monastery's nose. An aging specialist, a sensory guide, a man whose olfactory talents are spoken of in hushed, reverent tones, mostly because he once correctly identified the origin of a tainted wheel from a single sniff. You follow him into the cellar. He carries no tools, no parchment, just a small brush and a candle stub. He's not here to weigh or prod or test. He's here to smell. The moment the cellar door opens, it hits you like a choir, an orchestra of odors, layered, deep. You can pick out the high grassy notes of goat cheese, the earthy musk of aged cow rounds, the almost floral whiff of the experimental herb wheels, and from one ominous corner the scent of something alive. Brother Furman leads you shelf to shelf, stopping occasionally to lean in and inhale slowly, like a sommelier, evaluating a glass of something aged in mystery and mild mischief. This one, he murmurs, is entering its noble phase. You lean in. It smells like an old forest and toasted grain. You nod as if you understand, which you absolutely do not. Another wheel receives a frown, rind too dry. Perhaps the wind from the southern gate is reaching this corner again. He mutters something about redirecting airflow with stacked firewood and scribes a note in chalk on the stone beside it. Rotate. You follow him deeper into the section where the blue cheeses reside. This is the cathedral, the holiest of holies. The air is cooler, wetter. The shelves here are lower to the ground, and the wheels are darker veined with blue like lightning trapped in butter. Some are wrapped in leaves, others are left bare, their moldy crust looking almost ancient like weathered stone. Furman stops before one. This cheese, he whispers, once made a monk cry, tears of awe, or perhaps mild sinus irritation. You laugh, but you believe him. He lifts it carefully, pressing the rind with his thumb, then leans in to smell the center crack. His eyes flutter closed, a deep inhale. Juniper, he says. You blink. Did someone put juniper in it? No, he replies, opening one eye. It just remembers. You decide not to question that. The monks here don't just track cheese with ledgers, they track it with language. Furman describes one batch as smelling like the inside of an old chapel pew, another as anxious but improving. One poor wheel is simply labeled needs prayer. There's poetry in the way they describe it, as if each cheese is a personality, a spirit passing through a series of sacred moods. And honestly, after spending so much time here, you're inclined to agree. You reach a batch of cheese wrapped in nettle leaves and tied with twine. Furman unwraps one, sniffs, then hums in approval. He hands it to you. You take a deep breath. It smells like damp stone, crushed herbs, and something else, something soft and nostalgic, like old paper, like a forest path after rain, like Sunday afternoons you can't quite remember. You nod. That's something. Furman smiles. You're learning. He marks the wheel with a line of chalk, just a single stroke, gentle and purposeful. This one, he says, goes to the refectory. Tonight's meal. You carry it back up with him, both of you emerging into the light, like minor prophets returning from a cave. As you step into the courtyard, you notice the other monks preparing for their midday meal. Benches are set beneath the arbor, and bread is being sliced with the same solemnity normally reserved for communion. You place your chosen wheel in the center of the table. Someone lights a candle beside it, and just like that, it becomes the star of the meal. The monks take turns slicing slivers, and no one speaks. It's not a rule, it's just unnecessary. The cheese says everything. Furman sits across from you, nodding in quiet satisfaction as he tastes. Good finish, he murmurs. You chew slowly, letting the flavor linger. It's earthy, yes, but also a little sweet, complex, deep, a flavor that invites silence. And so you eat, surrounded by monks' bread and soft candlelight. No ceremony, no fanfare, just reverence for something aged well. After the midday meal, the monks drift away in different directions, some toward prayer, others to the garden, and a few, including yourself, toward the archives. But today you're not returning to ledgers or recipes. Today you're chasing a mystery. It begins in a dark, unused corner of the scriptorium, where an old half-rotted shelf has been recently uncovered during some minor repairs. A junior monk discovered it when his candle dropped behind a tapestry, and what he found might be the cheese mystery of the century. You stand with two monks and a novice, all staring at a stack of weathered parchment scrolls, wrapped in linen, sealed with wax, and labeled in a hand none of you recognize. The writing is angular, older than anything else in the scriptorium. Even the ink has faded to a rusty brown. At the top of the bundle is a single word, tacitum. The monks exchange quiet looks. Brother Anselm, the scriptorium's elder, clears his throat. We don't usually read tacitum, he says carefully. You of course ask why. He shrugs. Because it's not there. That's not helpful. But they slowly explain that there are gaps in the monastery's cheese records, decades-long stretches where documentation simply vanishes. No entries, no inventory, no production notes. And yet oral tradition insists the monastery continued making cheese without interruption. Some monks whisper of a secret order within the abbey, cheesemakers who operated outside the usual ledgers. Not rogue exactly, but reserved, hidden, making a special type of cheese only for the most sacred ceremonies, or, depending on whom you ask, for the most controversial abbot in the abbey's history, Abbot Everard. Ah yes, Everard, the abbot who introduced calendula flowers into the herb garden, who wrote sermons in verse, and who, according to legend, once tried to convince the bishop that cheese could be used in place of holy water. Historians still argue whether Everard was a genius or a nutcase. Some claim his influence nearly ruined the abbey. Others believe he revitalized it with a wave of culinary and spiritual innovation. What's certain is that his years in office coincide exactly with the mysterious cheese silence in the records. You ask to read the scrolls. Anselm hesitates. We don't know what's inside. That's never stopped you before. Carefully, reverently, you unroll the top scroll. The parchment crackles like dry leaves. The ink is faint but legible. It begins. For the silence of the rind and the flavor of the unnamed. That's not ominous at all. The scroll details a recipe, but not just any recipe. This is cheese elevated to ritual. The milk must be gathered at night, the curd stirred by candlelight, the herbs wild thyme, ground ivy, marigold must be sung to. Yes, sung. And then there's the brining done with spring water mixed with a dash of wine and ink. Ink. You read that twice. A note at the bottom reads, for consumption only on feast days of unnamed saints. Brother Anselm leans over your shoulder and mutters, that explains everything and also nothing. More scrolls follow, each stranger than the last. One features diagrams of cheese molds shaped like stars. Another appears to be a cheese-focused psalm. A third includes a drawing of a cheese wheel floating on a pond circled by frogs. You look up. Was he okay? Anselm sighs. He was expressive. You continue reading. One scroll is labeled Lactis Tenebrae, or Milk of Shadows. It describes a cheese aged entirely in darkness, wrapped in wax, and never unsealed until a monk's final hours. Another scroll simply reads, the one that smelled of miracles. At this point, the monks begin to drift from suspicion to fascination. You can see it in their eyes, the spark of discovery of something long buried, suddenly returned to the light. A debate begins. Should the tacitum cheeses be recreated, or are they best left sealed in parchment and mystery? One monk insists that opening the silent flavors might awaken spiritual insights lost for generations. Another mumbles something about indigestion. Historians still argue about these lost cheeses. A few fringe researchers claim similar scrolls have been found in other monastic archives, always unsigned, always folded into the quietest corners, always connected to abbots with peculiar dietary philosophies. Some believe the tacitum tradition was real, others call it monastic fan fiction. But to hear now, with these scrolls in your hands, the line between fact and flavor has never felt more blurred. You spend the rest of the afternoon copying one of the shorter recipes into fresh parchment. You don't fully understand the method or the purpose, but the act itself feels sacred, like preserving a piece of monastic soul. As the sun sinks, the monks agree to store the scrolls in the main library, still sealed, but no longer forgotten. They place them in a wooden box tied with new linen marked not with a name but with a symbol. A cheese wheel, split, silent. You step out into the cool evening air, your hands dusted with ink, your mind whirling with cheese psalms and lunar brines. You've tasted herb wheels and brined rounds, you've stirred curds and salted rinds, but now you've smelled the edge of a mystery, and somehow it smells divine. You wake up before the bell stirred not by sound but by scent, faint, smoky, and just a little sweet. It seeps into your cell like an invisible thread tugging you gently out of dreams and into the folds of your robe. As you shuffle toward the kitchen courtyard, you recognize the aroma. It's not cheese this time. Not quite. It's wood smoke and wet stone. It's wool and pine resin. It's a smell of something being smoked. And that means only one thing. Today is cheese smoking day. It doesn't happen often, only a few times a year. But when it does, the entire abbey shifts into a different rhythm, a quieter, more focused energy. Like the cheese itself is watching. You arrive just as the fire is being stoked beneath the smokehouse, a low stone hut with narrow slits for air, and a heavy oak door darkened by decades of soot. Inside, racks line the walls. Some are empty. Others hold baskets, linen-wrapped bundles, and on the top shelf, rounds of cheese, each marked with a smudge of ash. A monk named Brother Milo is in charge. He's small, wiry, and always smells like juniper. He doesn't speak often, but today he motions you in and hands you a bundle of damp herbs, rosemary bay applewood shavings. You toss them into the brazier, and the room fills with smoke, not choking, but thick and fragrant, curling upward in sleepy spirals. You sit near the doorway watching the smoke rise and wrap around the wheels. The scent changes minute by minute. One moment it's sweet and green, the next sharp and spicy like peppercorns warming in a pan. Milo turns the wheels slowly, gently, reverently. He doesn't take notes, doesn't check a timer. He just watches, listens, smells. You ask how he knows when they're done. He shrugs. The cheese tells me. That tracks. Monasteries have used smoke to preserve food for centuries. Meat, fish, herbs, and yes, cheese. Smoking not only extends shelf life, it imparts a kind of time signature, a memory etched into the rind. Cheese smoked with pine might taste like December, with cherry wood like summer, with rosemary and thyme like prayer. Some abbeys developed entire reputations around their smoke techniques. One in the Alps was famous for its triple smoked rounds aged over beechwood and buried in ash for 6 months. Another swore by elder branches and goat's milk. Their cheese, it said, once made a visiting cardinal tear up, probably from joy, possibly from strength. Historians, of course, still debate whether these methods were consistent or just happy accidents. Smoke, after all, is hard to standardize. Wind changes, wood shifts. Even the mood of the monk stirring the fire can change the final taste. But here in this little hut with Milo's soot-smudged face glowing in the firelight, the method feels perfect. Not mechanical, not sterile, just right. After an hour, you carry a finished wheel outside. It's warm, soft, and smells like every campfire you've ever wished would last longer. You place it on a wooden rack to cool, then grab another from the waiting pile. This one's wrapped in nettles, another is coated in honey and cracked peppercorns. You ask Milo if they always smoke their cheese the same way. He shakes his head. Never. Cheese remembers. It gets bored if you repeat yourself. You grin. The rest of the morning is spent tending fire, turning rounds, and chasing smoke away from your eyes. A few curious novices stop by asking if today's batch is the kind with bark. You're not sure what that means, but someone hands them slices from a past wheel to nibble, and everyone walks away smiling. By midday, the air around the cloister smells like incense and toast. Monks pass by with soft glazed eyes. One murmurs, "It smells like Pentecost." No one argues. You return to the cooling racks and find Brother Milo slicing thin shavings from a finished round. He offers you a piece. It's unlike anything you've tasted so far. Still creamy, still sharp, but layered with smoke, like someone bottled the smell of an old hearth and turned it into flavor. It coats your tongue, then fades slowly, leaving a hint of something almost metallic, like memory. Milo nods. That one'll speak for days. You don't ask what he means, you just eat another slice. Later in the refectory, the smoked wheels are sliced and served with barley bread and spiced ale. No one says much. It's that kind of meal. Contemplative, focused, as if the cheese demands your full attention. And honestly, it kinda does. One monk slices a piece so thin it's translucent, then holds it up to the candlelight and whispers, like stained glass. You start laughing and nearly choke on your ale. In the corner, Brother Furman, yes, the cheese nose, nods sagely, then sneezes twice. Powerful batch, he declares. Even Brother Adelard, the rodent tactician, stops by to collect a few leftover rinds. Smoke keeps the mice away, he says, unless they're unusually cultured. You make a mental note, smoked cheese, rich, edible mouse deterrent. By the time the meal ends, the fire has burned low. The wheels have cooled. The smoke has faded from the halls, leaving only a soft trace in the air, like the echo of a chant. You help carry the remaining rounds to the pantry. There's one you made yourself. You mark it quietly, tucking your initial beside a small sprig of rosemary pressed into the twine. A new kind of signature, a smoky whisper tucked inside a wheel. You're back in the courtyard again, but this time it's not your feet that bring you here, it's the sound of scraping. Stone on stone, wood on wood, a low, steady rhythm you've come to recognize as distinctly monastic. A group of monks is gathered around a long, sun-bleached table lifting cheese wheels from the cellar one by one. But they're not just checking or turning them, they're carving them. You step closer, blinking against the afternoon sun. At first it looks like they're simply marking dates or initial standard stuff, but then you notice the details. One wheel bears an elaborate spiral pattern around the edge. Another has a small cross yes, but it's wrapped in vinework. A third features a bird, possibly a dove, possibly a slightly lopsided goose. Brother Stefan, the artisan of the group, sees your interest and gestures you over. He hands you a small curved knife worn to a shine by decades of work. Today you're learning about the sigils of the rind. Monks, he explains, didn't just label their cheese. They branded it with meaning. Some markings were practical. A circle meant aged in ash. A star indicated a feast day batch. Dots for days, lines for regions, but others told stories. There were wheels carved to commemorate events, a bountiful harvest, a brothers passing a royal visit. Some were symbolic, designed to invoke blessings, and a few were, cryptic. Stefan shows you a wheel from the vault, labeled only with an eye, no pupil, no iris, just an open staring shape. No one knows what it means, or who carved it. Could have been Brother Everard, Stefan mutters. Ah yes, Everard, still making ripples centuries later. You try your hand at carving. Your first attempt looks more like a mushroom than the intended fish. The second a vaguely nervous-looking sun, but the monks nod politely. One pats your back. It's a start. They show you some of the tools used, bone chisels, heated branding irons, even carved stones rolled across soft rinds to imprint patterns. One ancient stamp kept in a velvet-lined box bears a tiny rendering of the entire abbey. No one uses it anymore. It's ceremonial now, a relic. Historians have long debated whether these sigils held true significance or were just personal flourishes. Some abbeys were meticulous mapping, cataloging, even creating mini encyclopedias of their cheese symbols. Others were more spontaneous. Brother Jerome once carved a frog into his batch, Stephen recalls, because it croaked at him during milking. The frog batch naturally became legendary and slightly controversial. But beyond the symbolism, there was something deeper happening here. These markings weren't just for record keeping, they were a kind of prayer. In a world where so much was dictated hours, readings, fasts, chores, this was a moment of expression. Quiet rebellion, maybe, or humble artistry. A message carved into the skin of something impermanent. A monk might spend weeks stirring and pressing and salting, but in the end he'd sign his work with a shape, a swirl, a small face, then let it age in silence. And maybe, just maybe, someone would remember him by it. After carving, the wheels are carefully oiled, usually with olive oil mixed with herbs to preserve the markings. Then they're returned to the aging shelves, where they'll sit for weeks or months, slowly deepening in flavor and symbolism. You watch as one monk sets aside a wheel with a carved starburst. It's bound for a winter feast. Advent cheese, he whispers. We wait for it. It waits for us. You spend the afternoon working on your own mark. Nothing fancy, just your initials surrounded by a rough vine pattern. But it feels good. Like you've added something to the abbey. Like a monk from the future might lift this wheel and wonder who you were and why you cared enough to carve it. As the light begins to fade, the monks start stacking the finished wheels in a handcart. They'll go to the cooler cellar tonight to rest beneath ash and straw. You help load them carefully, cradling each one like a newborn. On your way back to your cell, you pass the chapel. Evening light filters through the stained glass, painting the floor in red and blue and gold. And there, just inside the door, is a shelf. You've never noticed it before. On it sits a single cheese wheel, wrapped in linen, marked with a sigil you don't recognize, just a circle with a line drawn straight through the center. You lean closer. There's a note beneath it, in silence flavor. You don't know who wrote it, or when, or why, but it feels right. You step back, let the chapel door close behind you, and walk toward the dormitory, the scent of herbs and rinds still clinging to your sleeves. Tomorrow someone will taste that wheel, and if they're paying attention, they'll hear what you carved. Dawn breaks slowly over the abbey, wrapped in fog. The bell tower looks like it's floating, half vanished in the morning mist. You breathe it in the cold, damp air, the smell of wet stone, and faint beneath it all. Butter. That's never a good sign. You follow the scent through the cloister walk boots, squelching slightly on the mossy flagstones. A novice sprints past, holding a cloth-wrapped bundle that's dripping suspiciously. Another monk emerges from the kitchen door, looking somewhere between annoyed and amused. Troubles afoot? You step into the outer kitchen and immediately understand today you've stumbled upon a scandal. Not a big one. No lives are at stake. But within the sacred salted order of this monastery, the offense is profound. Someone smuggled butter into the cheese room. It's sitting there now, soft and golden in an unmarked crock. No note, no label, just guilt in dairy form. Brother Ivo is pacing slowly beside it, arms crossed, looking as though he's trying very hard not to yell. Not because he isn't upset, but because yelling would disturb the rinds. You try to ask what's going on, but a novice whispers before you can. Some monks, especially from the village, say butter's more holy than cheese. Ah, now it makes sense. You've just walked into an age-old theological argument. See, while cheese was central to monastic diets, butter held a more complicated place. It wasn't aged, it wasn't sacredly brined, it spoiled quickly, it melted with a sigh. In some monasteries it was seen as a luxury, even a temptation. Others swore by it. Some orders embraced butter, fully smearing it on barley loaves, mixing it with herbs for feast days, even using it to anoint wounds. But in stricter houses like this one, it was viewed with suspicion. Too rich, too indulgent, too worldly, and perhaps most damning of all, too French. Historians still argue over the butter versus cheese divide. Was it regional, liturgical, practical, or just another excuse for monks to whisper about each other in the corridor? Theories abound. You sit near the hearth sipping warm barley tea, listening as the debate simmers. One monk insists that Brother Everard was secretly pro-butter. Another says he caught a novice sneaking a buttered oatcake into the chapel last Lent. Eventually, Brother Evo sighs, takes the crock, and places it gently but firmly on the very top shelf, far from the cheeses. It may exist, he declares, but it shall not be among us. The matter is closed, for now, but your curiosity is lit. Later that morning, you find a dusty book in the library. It's not in the main stacks, it's wedged behind an old psalter wrapped in parchment and labeled simply, Additions, Annotations, and Abominations. Inside are pages of notes on controversial ingredients, cabbage in the ailment in the stew, and yes, butter in the cheese. You turn the page. There it is, the butter scandal of 1327. Apparently, during a particularly cold winter, a desperate monk attempted to stretch the cheese rations by mixing softened butter into partially aged wheels. The result, creamy, soft, heretical deliciousness. The scandal rocked the abbey. The cheese, however, was excellent. You read on. One note suggests the practice continued in secret with certain batches marked by a hidden symbol, a circle within a circle scratched beneath the rind. You flip back in your memory. Haven't you seen something like that? A quick dash to the cellar confirms it. There on the lower shelf, almost hidden behind the larger wheels, sits a small round bundle wrapped in cloth. You unwrap it slowly. The rind is soft, fragile, and there underneath, scratched faintly into the surface, a double circle. The contraband cheese. You slice a sliver. It's divine, soft as a secret, bright, creamy with a finish that tastes like forgiveness. Butter and cheese dancing. You rewrap it carefully and return it to its place. Sometimes you think rules are honored best when broken gently. That evening at supper, a small plate of soft cheese appears on the abbot's table. He doesn't speak. He just tastes it, nods, and moves on. No one mentions the butter, but a few monks glance at each other and smile. Outside, the fog has lifted, the stars return clear and soft above the chapel, and somewhere beneath the kitchen floor a small crock of butter continues to sit neither condemned nor consumed. A quiet compromise, a sacred scandal, and another flavor quietly aging in the abbey's long, delicious history. You wake to the gentle creak of wood and the faint sound of quills scratching parchment. It's still dark, just a hint of blue teasing the edges of the sky outside your window. Today you've been invited into one of the most sacred spaces in the monastery, a room where few outside the order ever go. The scriptorium. Not just a library or a place for copying scriptures, the scriptorium is where words meet silence, where thought is laid carefully onto vellum, and where, as it turns out, cheese occasionally leaves a trace between the lines. You step inside. The room is long and narrow, dimly lit by candles and one narrow window that slices the gloom with a shaft of pre-dawn light. Monks sit at desks angled just so their heads bowed, quills dancing slowly over parchment. You hear the occasional soft puff of breath, the clearing of a throat, the whisper of pages being turned, and faintly a quiet crunch. You follow the sound to the far corner where Brother Wilrick is hunched over his desk, copying a manuscript on herbal remedies. Beside his elbow sits a plate with a few small, crumbling chunks of cheese. One is speckled with sage, another with what looks like tiny violet petals. You blink, He looks up, sees your expression, and smiles without guilt. Scripture feeds the soul, he whispers. Cheese keeps the hand steady. You're beginning to understand just how deeply this monastery's cheese has seeped into every corner of life. Brother Wilrick offers you a seat. You ease into the wooden bench, accept a small nibble of the cheese, and glance at the page he's working on. It's beautiful. Crisp Latin lettering flourishes on the capitals, a tiny illuminated plant curling up the margin. You look closer. Wait, is that? Yes, a cheese wheel. Tiny nestled into the illuminated border rendered with gold and ochre, complete with wavy steam lines rising from it like incense. You look at Wilrick. He shrugs, unapologetic. Brother Hadrick's idea, he murmurs, said it needed something edible. You flip through a few more pages, copies of herbal guides, minor saints' lives, even a weather chart, and you begin to notice a pattern. Cheese appears everywhere, in the margins, in the diagrams, even in one rather playful rendition resting reverently in the hands of a stylized angel. You raise an eyebrow. Monks get bored too, Wilrick says, as though it explains everything, and maybe it does. Historians do note this phenomenon, the blending of the sacred and the mundane in marginalia. Cats chasing mice beside verses about discipline, monks wrestling dragons in the corners of psalms, and yes, cheese often drawn lovingly, sometimes absurdly. One theory suggests these illustrations were a form of release. Another claims they were visual cues for readers, a way to lighten long hours of copying. Some scholars believe it was simply joy manifesting in ink and pigment. And now you know it's also because monks really like cheese. As the sun finally rises, shafts of golden light spill across the room. You help Wilrick carefully lift a finished page from his desk and lay it on a drying rack. Then he pulls out a different book, older, rougher, a kitchen ledger. Only this one isn't just recipes or inventories, it's poems, cheese poems. You blink. He nods. It started as a joke, he explains. But after a while, you read, "O wheel of life, thy rind so cracked, beneath thy crust all fears unpacked, a taste of Eden sharp yet kind, thy scent a balm to heart and mind." Another one, "Goat milk crumb of silent prayer, molded slow with monkish care. You melt not just on tongue but thought, and teach us peace that can't be bought." You close the book slowly. You're not entirely sure what just happened, but you feel calm, full, centered. There's a power in these words, not just as poetry, but as memory, a testimony to a life lived slowly, quietly, richly. You help Wilrick organize a few more scrolls before leaving. On your way out, he slips you a folded scrap of vellum. "Your turn," he says. You open it later in the garden. It reads, "Describe what you've tasted, not just what you've seen." You chew on that for a while. Back in the cloister, the bell rings for terce. Monks move quietly past you. One drops a crumb of cheese to a waiting bird. Another adjusts a stack of wrapped rounds being delivered to the guest house. You return to your cell for a moment, sit down, and begin to write. You don't write much, just a simple line. The silence in cheese is louder than most people think. It's midday now, and the courtyard is warm sunlight, dabbling through grapevine shadows, bees dawdling lazily between thyme blossoms. You walk with your hands behind your back, feeling like a character in a book you didn't mean to read so deeply. But here you are on page 200, nodding knowingly at the bees. You've been invited to visit the storage vaults, but not the ones with wheels aging on wooden slats. No, this is the deep storage, the dusty corner of the monastery, where cheese goes to disappear on purpose. Brother Gervais meets you by a worn oak door with a ring of iron keys and a faint smell of vinegar. "We're going into the belly," he says, and you can't tell if that's literal or metaphorical. Probably both. The door opens to reveal a low-arched passage that smells like stone and secrets. Lanterns sputter faintly on the walls, casting long shadows as you descend a narrow staircase into what feels like the basement of memory. The monks call this place the deep pantry. It's here that the old cheeses are stored, the ones too cracked, too strong, too holy, or just too strange to serve in the refectory. Some are experiments, others are relics. One, you're told, was made during a lunar eclipse and has been aging for over 60 years. The air is cool and still. The shelves are stone, the wheels wrapped in waxed linen or buried in jars of salt. Each has a tiny clay tag tied to it, bearing a date, a symbol, or occasionally a single word. You pause at one marked patience, another says unintended, a third simply don't. Brother Gervais leads you slowly, respectfully past the resting rounds. These are our oldest guests, he says. They don't speak often, but when they do, you remember it. He stops at one particular jar sealed with beeswax and wrapped in cloth. He opens it. Inside is a cheese so dark it's almost black. The rind glistens slightly like the skin of an ancient fruit. You lean in. It smells like damp forest metal and something you can't quite name, like a forgotten hymn. This, he says, was Brother Henrik's. You wait. He died before tasting it. Left a note, it isn't ready. So we're still waiting. You ask if anyone's ever tried a wheel too early. Gervais grimaces. We lost a choir boy for a day, said he saw God, or possibly St. Jude. Historians do document cheese aging beyond reason rounds left for decades, sometimes centuries out of reverence or sheer stubbornness. There are records of noble families gifting grandfather wheels at weddings. One monastery reportedly buried its strongest batch beneath the altar. No one dares dig it up. You continue walking, passing jars, pots, wrapped bundles. Some are clearly cracked and dried. Others have bloomed with such extravagant mold that they resemble geology more than food. One shelf is entirely devoted to the rinds that refused. These are cheeses that never matured properly, that deflated, split, or turned odd colors, but were still kept. Not eaten, not discarded, just respected. They failed faithfully, Gervais says. That counts for something. You reach the far wall where a single shelf holds what looks like a row of books. But no cheese. Square wheels pressed flat and stacked like scripture. The monk opens one and lets you smell it. It's sharp, grassy, with a faint hint of pepper and age. A cheese that smells like it's been waiting to tell you a secret. He closes it again and says, we call these the pages. The symbolism isn't lost on you. Before leaving, you place a hand on one small round sitting alone. Its label is blank, untouched, forgotten. Gervais watches you. We think it's someone's penance, he says, but we don't know whose. Outside, the sun still shines, the bees still drift. The monastery hums gently above, unaware of the cheese chapel beneath its floor. As you emerge into the courtyard, the light feels brighter, louder, like your eyes have aged just a little with the wheels. You join the monks in the herb garden, kneeling beside rows of sage and marjoram. Your hands still smell of wax and mold. No one speaks, but every now and then someone glances at the stone steps that lead below, and they smile, because they know somewhere down there there's a cheese waiting, watching, becoming, and it's got time. It's early evening now. The long shadows stretch lazily across the cloister walk, and the monastery settles into that golden hush, the kind that feels like the world is exhaling after holding its breath all day. You're on your way back from the garden, hands damp from basil, when a monk you don't recognize stops you in the corridor. He's holding a letter, worn parchment wax seal. You open it slowly. It's a summons from the abbot. You pause for a moment, heart ticking a little faster, then you smile. At this point, how could it be anything but cheese? And you're right. You arrive at the abbot's quarters, simple, stone-walled, filled with books and bundles of herbs drying from the rafters. The abbot gestures to a bench, offers you a cup of warm spice milk, and gets straight to the point. There's something he says I'd like you to deliver. He reaches beneath the bench and lifts a small wooden box bound with wax twine and wrapped in linen. It's heavier than you expect. Inside, resting like a relic, is a wheel of cheese. But not just any cheese. This is Papal Parmesan. Yes, really. It's a rare tradition long whispered about, occasionally recorded, and frequently romanticized. But it happened. From time to time, popes developed tastes for specific monastic cheeses, usually hard-aged ones that traveled well and survived the rigors of horse carts and sea voyages. And when a monastery created something remarkable, truly divine, it was known to send a gift to Rome. Today, that task falls to you. The abbot explains this particular wheel has aged for 12 years. It's dense, sharp, slightly granular, and wrapped in bark from a tree, said to have grown near the bones of a minor saint. Don't eat it, he says with a smile. He shows you the scroll that will accompany it, written in Latin, signed by every monk in the cloister, sealed in red wax. It includes the name of the cheese, Gratia Obscura, the ingredients, and a brief line. May it be received in humility and grated with reverence. You nearly laugh, but then again, they mean it. Historians still argue whether any popes actually received these monastic gifts. Some say yes, citing a 15th century record of wheels being sent by mule to Avignon. Others claim the stories are apocryphal, spread by monks seeking clout. But here it's real, in your hands. You'll carry the wheel as far as the trade road. From there, a merchant caravan known to the brothers will take it south toward the coast, then across the sea. You ask what makes it Papal Parmesan and not just, well, Parmesan. The abbot shrugs. We prayed over it twice. You leave the quarters with the box in your arms, moving through the abbey like a knight bearing a sacred relic. Monks nod as you pass. One novice bows slightly. Another offers you a sprig of rosemary for good luck. Outside, a donkey cart waits near the gates, its driver already munching on a barley biscuit. You hand over the package and the scroll. The merchant bows deeply, more than seems necessary, and stows it carefully beneath the folded cloth. Rome, he asks. You nod. Then I'll drive slow. The cart rumbles down the road, fading into the amber light of dusk. You watch it go until the last wheel creaks over the hill and disappears. And just like that, a piece of the monastery is headed into the wider world. A wheel of faith, salted, pressed, aged, and prayed over. Not for profit, not for fame. Just because it was good, and good things are meant to be shared. You sit on the stone bench beside the gatehouse, watching the wind rustle the grapevines. The cheese may never arrive. It may be eaten by mice or misplaced in a merchant's pantry, but that's not the point. The point is that it was made with love, sent with hope, and remembered in story. Later that evening, back in the refectory, someone places a smaller wheel on the table. It's not for trade, not for popes, just for the brothers. You cut a piece and chew slowly. It's not as sharp, not as grand, but it's perfect. And you understand cheese doesn't need to be papal to be powerful. Sometimes it just needs to be eaten by people who prayed with the cows, stirred the curds, and carried the wheel with steady hands. You finish your bite smiling. Somewhere a pope might be doing the same. Night has fallen again. The moon hangs heavy and low over the abbey, its light spilling like pale butter across the cloister stones. The monastery is quiet now, truly quiet. Not the stillness between bells or the pause in prayer, but a full, soft silence that settles over everything like wool. You're awake, not because you're on duty or because of some monastic requirement, but because tonight is the vigil. Once every season, a small group of monks gathers not for prayer, not for fasting, but for remembering. It's unofficial, unsanctioned, and whispered about only in the gentlest tones. They call it the wheel vigil. You're invited. A novice leads you down a narrow hallway lit by a single candle. At the end of the corridor is a small wooden door barely tall enough to step through without ducking. Behind it, warmth light and the unmistakable scent of cheese rinds in wood smoke. You're in the Abbey's cheese chapel. Yes, really. It's a round room built long ago, possibly as a cellar, possibly as a crypt. No one remembers. But over the years it's become something else entirely. A place for reflection through flavor. The walls are stone, the ceiling domed. In the center of the room sits a simple wooden table, and on that table 7 small cheese wheels, each resting on a slate tile, each marked with a candle. Brother Furman is here, so is Brother Milo. Even Brother Adelard, who has brought a very well-behaved mouse in a basket for educational purposes. They welcome you with soft smiles and cups of something warm that smells like rosemary and milk. The vigil begins. One by one, each monk chooses a cheese, slices a sliver, and shares a memory. Some are practical. This was Brother Thomas's batch before the great rain kept the cellar dry by accident. Others are emotional. We made this after Brother Mathieu passed. It didn't turn out, but we kept it anyway. One story makes everyone laugh, something about a goat a cartwheel and an entire feast spoiled by premature salting. You sit there listening, chewing, tasting not just the cheese, but the lives folded into it. Each bite is a memory, each flavor a story. When it's your turn, you hesitate. Then you speak of the first curds you stirred, the morning brine, the hidden scrolls, the butter scandal, the carved sigil in a wheel you hope still rests in the cool dark below the chapel. They listen and nod and chew. You understand now, this isn't about the cheese. Not really. It's about what the cheese holds. Time, intention, memory, all packed into curds and pressed beneath wooden boards and turned gently each week until the past becomes edible. You sample a sliver from the 7th wheel. It's aged sharp, dry, crumbles the moment it touches your tongue. It tastes of cellar stone late summer and the kind of silence that happens only when words fail. That one Furman whispers was made the year the vines bloomed out of season. No one speaks for a while. Later, someone begins a soft chant, not a psalm, a lullaby. Monks hum along, swaying slightly, cradling their cups. You look around and feel at this strange holy bond. Men who gave their lives to silence and discipline, who pray with their hands and heal with herbs, and who somewhere along the way discovered that milk, simple, quiet milk, could become something eternal. One monk lights a final candle and places it in the center of the table. This, he says, is for what we've forgotten. You watch the flame flicker. You think of the wheels still aging in darkness, the scrolls tucked into dusty corners, the unmarked rounds in the deep pantry, the hands that shaped them long gone. But not gone, not really. You help clean up in silence. Each cheese is wrapped again, its slate wiped clean. The crumbs are swept into a small cloth pouch, nothing wasted. Before you leave, someone hands you a small wheel your own. It's the one you helped smoke days ago. The rind is firm now, the mark you carved still visible. You tuck it into your robe like a talisman. Outside, the night air is cold and fresh. You walk slowly back toward your cell, the moon now higher, silvering the edges of the grape leaves. You feel changed, not dramatically, not loudly, just aged, in the best way, like something left to sit quietly until it found its deeper flavor. You climb into bed and press the small wheel to your chest for a moment before placing it on the shelf beside your sleeping mat. You whisper a thank you to the cows, to the monks, to the mold, to the silence that taught you everything. The next day begins not with bells, but with a breeze. Your window is open, and the wind carries with it the scent of dew, damp grass, and wood smoke from a fire just rekindled. It smells less like a beginning and more like an exhale, like the monastery has just woken up beside you and is taking a deep breath before speaking. You rise slowly, stretch, and take your time dressing. Today there is no particular task, no scheduled rotation in the cheese room or kitchen. Instead, you're invited to participate in something rare, something few novices or guests ever witness, the ceremony of the last wheel. You follow the monks in quiet procession to the far edge of the abbey, grounds beyond the herb gardens, past the orchard and toward a small field bordered by cedar trees. In the center beneath a low wooden canopy sits a single cheese wheel, resting atop a carved stone pedestal. It's massive, nearly 2 feet across, banded in iron and wrapped in linen that's been darkened with age and time. This isn't a wheel made yesterday, or last season, or even last decade. This wheel is over 100 years old. The monks call it the Testament. No one eats from it. No one opens it. It's sealed in ritual reverence and beeswax, created by monks long gone, handed down from one generation to the next, not for flavor, but for meaning. A symbol of monastic continuity, a reminder that the work, the turning, the stirring, the aging never really ends. Brother Evo steps forward, holding a fresh cloth and a pot of warmed oil. He gently unwraps the linen, revealing a rind that glows faintly in the morning light. Honey gold crackled, etched with strange marks, not letters, not language, just shapes, symbols, the meaning lost to time. You help clean the surface, moving slowly, wiping away dust, but not memory. Other monks take turns anointing the rind, murmuring blessings not from any written rite, but from memory and tradition. No two are alike. One asks for patience, another for humility. A third simply says, "Thank you." Historians wouldn't know what to make of this, and that's the point. This isn't in a book. It isn't codified. It's memory held in milk fat and wax, a tradition too personal to explain. The Testament wheel is essentially a monastic diary with no words. You kneel beside it, resting your hand lightly on its surface. It's warm from the sun, rough and smooth in alternating patches. You close your eyes, and though it says nothing, you feel like it's telling you everything. You think of the cows, the novices stirring the vats, the old scrolls, the butter scandal, the ink in the brine, the goat who ruined a feast, the Pope's cheese, the wheel you carved, the mouse named Lord Sift, the angel with a cheese halo, all of it, turning. A cheese isn't just a product here, it's a process, a companion, a witness, a prayer bound in rind and time. Brother Furman breaks the silence with a low chant. Others join in, not words, but a hum, deep and slow, a vibration in the chest, a song for the wheel, a song for the monks who never left. Then the linen is wrapped again, the oil polished to a soft sheen. The Testament is returned to its shelf beneath the canopy. No one speaks as they walk back. Later that afternoon, you wander to the cheese room alone. You open the cellar door, descend the familiar steps, and sit beside the rows of aging rounds. They greet you like old friends. One still bears your initials, the rind slightly firm, now resting on straw. You touch it lightly. It hums with potential. One day someone will slice into it, or maybe it will crack, or be forgotten, or sit long enough to grow its own legend. But for now it rests, and so do you. You lean against the stone wall, the air cooled and sweet, filled with that comforting aroma of dust, herbs, and fermentation. You stay there until the candle burns low, breathing in the stories, the quiet, the thousands of hours packed into this underground choir of flavor. Above you the sun sets, below you the wheels wait, and around you the monastery turns day by day, season by season, rind by rind, never rushing, never stopping, always becoming. Just like cheese, you're leaving tomorrow. Not dramatically. There's no ceremony, no trumpet of farewell, No robe pressed into your hands with solemn vows, just a quiet understanding, a chapter ending, a wheel turned full circle. This morning you rise earlier than usual, not because of duty, but because you don't want to miss a moment. The abbey is still. Even the bells seem to sleep. You walk barefoot through the dew-kissed cloister, your footprints darkening the stones like ink on parchment. Every sound feels heightened now. The rustle of fig leaves, the distant coo of a dove, the soft drip of water from a gutter. You pass the herb garden, and for once no one is clipping or tending. Just you and the bees and the wild hum of rosemary waking up to the sun. You reach the kitchen where Brother Milo is already kindling a fire. He doesn't say good morning, he simply hands you a ladle. One last stir. Today's batch is simple cow's milk nettle wrapped, familiar, reliable, a final echo of everything you've learned. The curds form as the fire builds, the steam rising around your face like incense from a hidden altar. You stir without instruction, because you don't need it anymore. Later you help shape the rounds, pressing the cloth into the molds, weighing them with polished stones. One wheel is yours, unspoken, understood. You wrap it carefully and set it on the lowest shelf in the outer cellar. No initials this time, just a small sprig of thyme tucked into the twine. A silent goodbye. In the scriptorium, Brother Wilrick lets you write one final entry into the ledger. The ink smells like walnuts and dust. Your hand moves slowly. Left today with hands that remember, may my silence carry flavor. You set down the quill. He nods, says nothing, but you know it means everything. The other monks drift through your day like pages in a book you've read too many times but never want to end. Brother Furman offers you a final sniff of his latest aging batch, grassy, with a hint of misplaced ambition, he declares. Brother Adelard hands you a tiny wooden carving of a mouse. Saint Redentius approves, he says. Brother Evo slips a folded scrap of parchment into your satchel. You'll read it later on the road. It simply says, turn yourself slowly. Store in cool places. Grow strong. Even the abbey cat rubs against your leg and flicks her tail like a comma. Afternoon comes soft and golden. You sit one last time beside the testament wheel in the cedar grove. You don't touch it. Just sit and listen. You swear you can hear it creak ever so slightly, becoming something new. Back at your cell, you pack lightly a bundle of herbs, a soft linen-wrapped cheese, a token from a pilgrim, a slip of vellum, a carved stamp. You've left behind more than you'll take, and yet somehow you leave heavier. That night at the final meal, the monks bring out a wheel carved with your sigil. They serve it with bread apples and the faintest drizzle of honey. No one says your name. They just chew and smile. Later in the chapel, you light a candle and sit near the back. The chanting flows around you like warm wind. Familiar now, less foreign, not because you understand every word, but because you've lived its rhythm. You leave before the final amen. One last walk through the cloister. One last look at the moonlight on the stones. You stop by the cellar door and listen. Silence. But the good kind. The kind that tastes like aged wood and softened edges. You step outside the gate the next morning just after dawn. A novice waves. Someone hands you a wheel for the road. You nod, tuck it under your arm, and begin walking. Down the hill, past the fig trees, toward whatever comes next. You don't know where this path will lead, but you know this. You carry with you patience and warmth and the quiet understanding that good things take time, that silence is full of stories, that cheese-like faith is never finished, only ripening. And somewhere deep inside you, a little monk-shaped part of your soul is still pressing curds by candlelight, still listening for the soft sigh of whey, still waiting, and still becoming. Now let your eyes grow heavy. You've walked long cloisters, carried warm curds, turned ancient wheels. You've sat beside monks who spoke in silence and carved their hearts into rinds. You've breathed cellar air and tasted time. Let those memories soften now, like a round resting on straw wrapped in linen pressed but never rushed. Let the rhythm of the abbey, the slow stirring, the gentle brushing, the muffled laughter echoing through stone cradle you. Let your thoughts drift like steam rising from the vat, curling into stillness. You're not alone. The cheese is still aging, the monks are still praying, and the world is still turning slow and sweet. Sleep now. You've earned your rest.